Okay, class, welcome back. Again, I'm in my storage closet. I lack that room of my own. Or this is the room of my own, right? Where no one else is in my house of 10 people. Yeah. So here I am. And we are about to talk about Lady Mary Wortley Montagu and the poem of hers we read for class this week called Epitaph. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Lady Mary Wortley Montagu. We have several web links in the lecture, the written out lecture that you can click on to find out more about her if you'd like or read more of her poems. There's even a Time magazine article that details how Lady Mary Wortley Montagu learned about the smallpox inoculation in Turkey, had her son and daughter inoculated there, and then publicized this novel procedure when she returned to England, which at the time was suffering from a smallpox epidemic that had previously killed her brother. So, if only, people like Anne Killigrew, who died from smallpox, could have been inoculated, then, how many lives would we have? And how much more writing would we have had from people like Anne Killigrew, who died from smallpox? But pretty interesting what Lady Mary Wortley Montagu did. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Um, there's also a YouTube clip that sets to music several quotes from Lady Mary Wortley Montagu that are really interesting, and her portrait is there. So, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu lived from 1689 till about 1762, or about 73 years of age. It's hard to know exactly when because we don't always know the birth dates and death dates definitively, so we say about 73 years. Um, And did I mention I'm in my closet again? Yes, I did. Yes, my storage closet. Okay. So it's not very pretty, but it's my room of my own. She was the patroness to feminist writer and educational theorist Mary Astle. Remember that when we talked about Mary Astle? We said that Mary Astle came from like a working class family up in Newcastle, England. She moved down to London after her parents died, leaving her no dowry. And she actually found patrons to support her to support her writing. So she wrote, and Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, that we're reading, also another writer, was her patroness. Now, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu was aristocratic and had wealth that she could spend on being a patroness. Mary Wortley Montagu was the daughter of the Duke of Kingston. So yeah, very wealthy, very much a noble of the noble class, the aristocratic class. Her mother died when she was young, so she presided at her father's table from a very young age. She was the woman of the house, so to speak. She seemed to have taught herself Latin by the age of 8, and she fell in love with Edward Wortley Montagu, but her father would not consent to the marriage and had arranged a different marriage for Lady Mary Wortley Montagu. But Mary broke the rules of the time by running off and eloping with Edward. That was unheard of, or not. It's pretty unusual for a lady who was noble and an aristocrat. Those are usually all arranged and they happen as expected, but here she eloped. So we're already seeing elements of someone who defies social norms, right? So, no surprise she ends up being a writer, right? Edward, her husband, uh, Edward Wortley Montagu, was later appointed ambassador to Turkey. Turkey! Yeah, Turkey, over in like Asia, Europe, half Europe, half Asia. So far, far away from England at this time. Would have taken a very long time to travel there. But Mary accompanied him to Turkey. Now, while she was there, she contracted smallpox, which pitted her beautiful face. This experience propelled Mary to use her wit to write ardently for a smallpox inoculation, in other words, a smallpox vaccine, about which she had learned in her travels. She even had her children inoculated. Her writings and actions were largely responsible for the acceptance of the vaccine. Um, eventually. I mean, it took a while, but it got introduced to and subsequently used in England and then all of Europe because of what Lady Mary Wortley Montagu wrote. Now, it was very unaccepted at first. People thought she was crazy. Now, she had been living in Turkey, and she saw that women of the Seraglio had very beautiful skin. And she wondered how this could be with all the smallpox that she had been accustomed to. I believe she even had a brother who died from it. And so she asked them, how do you keep their skin so beautiful? How do they survive smallpox? And what she was told was that the women of the Seraglio, which is kind of like the brothels, needed to be beautiful. That was their trade. That's how they survived. And so to be beautiful, they had to not get smallpox, or at least if they got smallpox, they had to have it be a very mild case. And the way they accomplished that was by um, exposing their young babies to smallpox, like by taking some of the wound, of the smallpox, pock, taking some of that pus and putting it on the child, exposing the child to it, the baby, as a baby, because they noticed that babies usually survived smallpox when given that pus. They didn't have very many blemishes from it. They survived and they didn't get too many. And so by exposing a young child to just a little bit of the virus, um, they were able to then have this immunity built up and resist it in the future and not die from it. And so have this very mild experience that wouldn't pockmark their face. So Mary did this very same thing to her children when she lived in Turkey. And she wrote about it, wrote many, many letters. She wrote so many. And when she got back to England, she kept telling everybody about this incredible treatment that she had used on her own children, and that she very much believed it and had the evidence from all these women and girls in Turkey that had survived, without blemishes and lived with immunity for the most part. So it's funny. I had read other people from the time period in England, and they were aghast or appalled that she would do this, and they said, "Oh, that's such a crazy scientific um, treatment to pursue, and it's from this non-Christian nation. You definitely shouldn't do that. Do it. It's the devil putting ideas in their head because they're not Christian, and so for all those reasons, you really shouldn't do it." And so people were dying. In fact, Voltaire wrote about that. I read some of his writings. He was saying, this Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, she's crazy. Voltaire wrote Candide. I don't know if you're familiar with him. She's like, she's talking about this treatment, and it's from this non-Christian nation, and it's this crazy science. And I have no idea why anybody would do it over in England, but it started catching on. And guess what? It really helped them combat smallpox. Because as I said earlier, smallpox killed about a third of the people who contracted it. And if you survived, you still had this horribly pockmarked face usually. And, that could really, obviously mess with someone's self-esteem too. So, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu is now remembered for being scientific enough to believe in this vaccine and bring it back and try it on her young babies and then bring it back to England and promulgate it there. So, pretty forward thinking, especially for women at these times who, weren't exposed to science and education like that, and who didn't have the freedom to do things like that, expose their children. But she did it. She did it. And we saw from a young age, she eloped. She wasn't your uh, person who would kowtow to social pressures. Throughout the course of her life, we know that Mary wrote at least 900 letters, and this woman was voluminous. She wrote at an incredible rate, 900 letters. And this is by hand. Of course, she wrote by hand. Because we have 900 of them now in print, so we know she wrote at least 900, perhaps more, maybe ones we didn't get, that didn't make it all the way. Because, she wrote a long time ago. She wrote in the 1600s. That's over 300 years ago. Anyway, before she died, Mary supplied the manuscripts of these letters to the appropriate people for publication. So she wanted them to be published. Sometimes you write things and you're like, I don't want anybody to see what I wrote, but she actually turned them over to be published. Um, and She wrote many witty, detailed accounts of her life in Turkey. So we have a really neat window into Turkey at that time and what it was like for an ambassador's wife to live there and her family. Others record her other letters of hers record her famous quarrel with Alexander Pope. Alexander Pope was another very, very famous poet and writer from this time period. He wrote lots of things you might be, maybe you're familiar with. I don't know. But yeah, he's a really famous writer from the 1600s. And she had a quarrel with him. And she also had friendships with Addison and Steele. They were very famous essayists that wrote essays that were very popular at this time period. And the essay form was a very popular form of writing during the 1600s. They were shorter pieces that people could just read for fun, kind of like maybe we scroll and read things on the internet. That's kind of like what the essayists did back then. Um, and she was friends with many other British literati, in other words, very famous people of letters who wrote. Um, Mary Astle wrote the introduction to the compendium of Mary Wortley Montagu's letters. Isn't that neat? So another connection between two of our female writers here. The selection of Mary Wortley Montagu's that we read for class is the short poem Epitaph. It's called Epitaph. The poem includes a reference to her quarrel with Alexander Pope. So enjoy Lady Mary Wortley Montagu and her poem Epitaph. Thank you.